I literally feel like I'm a part of a secret club right now. I feel like, you guys are building Amazon over here, and like everyone else is like, meh, like I like Kmart. It's good enough. I don't really need this Amazon thing. I don't see the potential. Nobody's talking about it.
Don't be Sears. Don't be Sears.
Or Sears. My mind's boggled because I listen to so many different podcasts. Like I'm like in everything. And why is Polygon not the top of everyone's conversation? Because this is revolutionizing everything about the space. Why is everyone not talking about this? And that's why I want to do this podcast, because I'm like, it's too good to be true. I don't understand. Like I was expecting to ask you these questions and you'd be like, well, okay, it's sub 5 seconds, but here's the catch. And, this is just shocking to me. It's shocking to me that like, where's the fanfare? It's like the Bitcoin ETF, man. We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming for a long time. Nobody was talking about it till the last second. Maybe that's how I'll be with this, once it's approaching, people are gonna be like, wait a minute. Welcome to Steady Lads. In this episode, I interview Marc, CEO of Polygon Labs. And this conversation will absolutely blow your mind, because that is what happened to me. My mind was blown. I was literally shaking by the end of this conversation because of what Polygon has built. Polygon is not what it was back in 2021. It used to be a single sidechain. It was a great chain. It's fast, low cost. Then a few years back, Polygon acquired two of the most talented ZK teams on the planet. And now they've built what they call Polygon 2.0, which is a universe of chains. It's infrastructure to allow a ton of different chains to be built from all kinds of people. You have OKX, they're building a chain. They have 50 million users. You have Polygon ZK EVM. You have the Polygon proof of stake chain becoming a validium chain. It's going to be in that ecosystem. All kinds of chains being built, and they're all connected together. And as Marc states in this episode, when fully built, you will be able to move between these chains in less than 5 seconds and seamless, as if you're using the exact same chain. You won't even know. You'll like transfer between chain A and chain B. You won't even know that you're using two different chains. For you, it'll feel like you're using the same chains. That is wild. And I think you'd be shocked to learn how soon that is going live. Marc mentions it in this episode. It's a little teaser. Draw you in. Get you to listen to the rest of this episode, because, man, you're going to be so pumped. You're going to be sitting there. You're going to be doing jumping jacks. You're going to be like, wow. What is Polygon building? How have I never heard of this? And how is nobody else talking about this? Because that's all I can say the whole episode is like, how is nobody talking about this? This is crazy. This is wild. It'll mean that you can have tens of thousands of chains and use them as if they're one singular chain. No more fractured liquidity. You can have hyper custom chains for really unique use cases, privacy chains, all kinds of stuff. You can have the SVM on Polygon. You could have Cosmos ecosystem chains on Polygon, all kinds of stuff. Really cool. And my personal opinion after talking with Marc is there's absolutely no way possible that the market is priced in all that Polygon's building. The market doesn't even know what's happening, because Polygon's brewing some magic over here. It is wild, absolutely wild. And I joked often during this conversation that Polygon has the super narrative, because they're literally doing everything you can imagine. They have Polygon Identity. They have, again, I just mentioned OKX coming with 50 million users building their own L2 on Polygon. They have their interop layer we talked about, Unified Liquidity. They have Libre, an institutional chain. If you're bullish on real world assets, they got that coming. You have Polygon DA, which, if you ever heard of Celestia, Celestia is awesome. Everyone loves Celestia. They do DA. Well, guess what? Polygon has their own DA thing. That's just a small aspect of what Polygon does. You have the MATIC token, which today is just used for the POS chain. It's just used for that one little side chain. It's going to become the POL token. And it's going to become like 1 million times more useful. And it's going to be tied into this entire universe of chains. It's no longer just tied to one chain, tied to an entire universe of chains. And you can do a bunch of other stuff with it. You have Polygon CDKs. You have gaming, which we didn't even talk about it on this episode because there's literally so much to talk about that I was like, I couldn't cover it all. It was that overwhelming. But between Immutable and Polygon, they control something like 70% of all new crypto games coming to market. Didn't even talk about that, but that's another thing Polygon's doing. You have Polygon ZK EVM, and you have a ton more that is going on. Again, I'm serious. You are not bullish enough on Polygon. This is a really great episode if you want to catch up to speed on all the crazy stuff Polygon's doing. Let's dive in. Can you briefly explain just who you are and how you relate to Polygon?
Sure. I'm Marc Boiron. I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Polygon Labs. Been here in the role about 6 months. Before that, I was the Chief Legal Officer at Polygon Labs, and I've been a lawyer in this space for about 7 years now. And so I live and breathe it like everyone else does in the space, and here I am.
Well, I didn't know you're a lawyer. Wait, how did you go from lawyer to CEO?
Yeah, I mean, I think like in this space, when you're a lawyer, if you really want to do a good job, you need to like dig into the tech like really, really deep. And then on top of that, I've always been kind of business driven. I think the first time I talked to Sandeep, I said, just be careful because you're hiring like an accidental lawyer. And so I've really thought about things from like a business perspective always. You dig into the product so deeply. And so when they were looking for somebody to take over as CEO, they're just like, okay, you get the space well, you get the business side well, you get the tech well, go for
it. Can you briefly explain, just maybe for people that haven't caught up to speed on what Polygon is, what Polygon used to be, say like 2 to 3 years ago, was Polygon 1.0, and how it's changed since then with Polygon 2.0 and your guys' new vision?
Yeah, I love that question because I think setting the ground for what Polygon has become is so important, right? So Polygon started basically saying, hey, we want to scale Ethereum. What's the best way to do that? And there was nothing out there to scale Ethereum. And so we ended up building a sidechain, and that is called what we refer to as Polygon POS. And that's what most people think of as Polygon. It's really just this sidechain. Now, the thing is, like, this sidechain actually doesn't get the recognition that it deserves. It is a sidechain that actually, right, it is secured by a decentralized set of validators. It is super cheap. It is super fast. It has this very robust ecosystem of dApps, like just frankly, I think probably more dApps than any other chain. It has all the tooling, all the SEX connections that you would want. Like, it has everything that you would want in an ecosystem. But the truth is that it wasn't the best built chain initially. What people don't realize is how much effort we've actually put in to Polygon POS to actually improve it, such that, you know, now it has like lowered its reorgs to basically being non-existent, right? It has a parallel kind of EVM implementation, a lot of things that people haven't realized. But on top of that, what we said is, okay, but Polygon POS is not the only thing that we need in the future. We need something more. And when we think about that, we think of like two things that define the internet and need to define blockchains. And so we kind of define this idea of like having infinite scalability and unified liquidity. And so what we did was we said, okay, to go ahead and develop this, what you need is really good ZK tech. And so we acquired two companies that I think combined, most are probably considered like the best ZK kind of team in the space. I think it's pretty safe to say. I think there's like other very good teams, don't get me wrong, but I think they're generally viewed that way. And now we center kind of everything around that, like the ZK tech. And so we kind of defined this vision of Polygon 2.0. And what we did is we've created what we refer to as Polygon CDK, the chain development kit. And what that does is it allows anyone to spin up a chain very, very easily. And they can now infinitely scale. They need more block space, spin up a new chain. And one implementation of that is one that we actually implemented, which we refer to as Polygon ZK VM. So now when you think about like chains that actually exist in the Polygon ecosystem, you have Polygon POS, and then you have Polygon ZK VM. And then you have this set of chains that anyone can run, which is Polygon CDK. But on top of needing that infinite scalability, you need that unified liquidity. And so one of the things that we are building that will be kind of released this year is what we're referring to as like an aggregation layer. We can get into that more, but the bottom line is it allows aggregating transactions across all of these chains. So what you'll get is you can get like a CDK spun up, and then you can plug it into this aggregation layer. And now you have a chain that can share in the liquidity of all the other chains. So you get like this monolithic feel, but you don't have the limitations of being monolithic. And that really ends up being kind of the vision of Polygon 2.0.
So there's a lot I want to dive into. I want to make a clarification. You earlier said SEX connections. He's talking about CEX, like a centralized exchange. There are some people who still get confused by that, and I just don't want you guys to think you're talking about anything weird. You talked a little bit about your developer community, and I saw something on Twitter just like yesterday talking about like the biggest developer communities in crypto. Number one was Ethereum. Number two was Polygon. And that actually surprised me to see that. Why do you think it is that you guys have such a big developer community?
Yeah, I mean, we attract a lot of new developers because Polygon POS is incredibly well established, incredibly easy to use, and EVM compatible. So if you're looking at Ethereum, obviously the biggest network and set of developers out there. What you're going to be say is like, okay, I need something cheaper. And like the thing you're going to default to most of the time is Polygon POS, and it's very easy to actually deploy there. And so that ends up attracting a lot of developers. We also do have like a very big effort. We're not known for this. And I think it's going to change over the next year for like our kind of developer community and like the time that we put into that. But we do put a lot of time into actually like helping that dev community grow in the Polygon ecosystem. And I think that we're going to see like that's going to be very obvious, I think, in more traditional ways than just a report over the next year.
So to kind of go back to what you were first saying, Polygon 2.0, we have this POS sidechain. It's amazing, amazing tech, awesome. You guys acquire two companies, two ZK teams. These guys come in and you guys rebuild in a way Polygon from the ground up, with a new focus being, instead of having this one side chain, you're going to have this universe of chains. Where you're building this central infrastructure, not to be centralized, but a central infrastructure for these for a bunch of different chains to build around. And some of that's the interop layer or unified liquidity. Some of that's the CDKs, so these developer kits. And the vision, the overall vision being that Polygon wouldn't be just one chain, but rather an infrastructure for a lot of different chains. I want to emphasize that because I think that is the one thing that most people don't realize about what Polygon was and what Polygon has become. And so the first thing I want to dive into, because that I think is maybe the most exciting thing, is this concept of unified liquidity. Can you explain what that is and how that works, and why that enables this universe of chains to feel in some ways like it's almost the same chain?
And I think that's really important. So there's two pieces to this, and we'll be releasing this in like two different stages. We've got like, let's call it like version 1 of this. And it's actually going to be a pretty simple thing, simple, relatively speaking. It's basically just going to be a unified contract that all of these CDK chains will plug into. It'll just be a contract on a smart contract on Ethereum. And what that's going to allow is interoperability between these chains, but it's going to be like slow. It'll still be expensive, but it will allow like true kind of secure interoperability in a much more trust minimized way than what you get anywhere else. That's kind of like version 1 that, if we want to preview things for next month, will be like a next month type thing. And then if we fast forward probably about 6-8 months, a little bit later, what we're going to get is like the what I'll consider like the game changing nature of the interop. And what we start doing at that point in time is there actually is a kind of new layer being built. And what it does is it aggregates proofs from all of these chains, right? So what you have to assume is all these CDK chains use ZK tech, and therefore they all use a prover, but also a proving system. And we don't need them to use the same prover, like the actual same machine, not necessary. It's not like a shared proving requirement. But what we do need them to use is the same proving system, which we are the leaders in creating kind of what Plonky 2 that is like widely used throughout like the ecosystem, and our provers use kind of Plonky 2. So when people launch CDKs, what they're going to do is they're going to be creating proofs that are like, let's call them like the same types of proofs. And what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate those proofs, bring those proofs kind of together, and then actually wrap those proofs in another proof. And you can actually continue to wrap more proofs into that wrapped proof. And what you get is actually you get a ton of, leaving aside like the interoperability, you actually get a ton of efficiencies from proving, because you're basically saying, hey, instead of each of these chains needing to prove to Ethereum, what you're going to do is they're all going to continue to like prove into proofs, and you'll put one massive proof, which doesn't cost you anymore. You'll put that onto Ethereum. But what you're going to do in the meantime with these proofs that all have the exact same trust assumptions is you are going to allow for cross-chain transactions when these proofs are being aggregated. And therefore, as these proofs get aggregated, you are going to allow for atomic kind of transactions between these chains. And you will have sub 5-second transactions between these chains.
You said preview next month, you're going to have version 1 of this, which is it's not going to be sub 5 seconds. It's going to be longer, but it's like the initial structure of it. And did you say 6 months potentially is what you could have?
We'll see in this year is the safe thing to say. We will see a second version of this aggregation that does more complete proof aggregation.
That's crazy. Okay, so even just this year, because interop is we're on the edge of it. I could feel it. I've seen so many different ways of like, we could maybe do interop with cross-chain intents. We could maybe do like shared sequencing. There's all these different ideas for like how we could see some sort of interop. But even like those things, I'm hearing a lot of people say, you know, by the end of this cycle, maybe by the end of 2025, we're going to have some of that stuff. And, you know, maybe some of it comes sooner, but this year, that's crazy to hear that you guys might have that ready. And you're saying sub 5-second transactions. That means if I want to move from chain A, so maybe I want to move from Polygon ZK EVM to OKX's X1 chain, that could take me potentially 5 seconds or less than 5 seconds.
Yes, but it's even better than that. Because most people, because of the limitations today, most people think of cross-chain transactions as just like, I'm going to transfer my ETH from chain A to chain B. But what we're talking about is actually not, I'm going to transfer my ETH from chain A to chain B, but I want to take some liquidity from a pool that sits on chain B. And therefore, I want to initiate a DEX transaction on chain A using liquidity on chain B. And therefore, you're actually executing a DEX transaction with much greater liquidity that actually sits on chain B, but you're actually just doing it on chain A. And so you're actually talking about like complete transactions between these chains rather than just I'm transferring an asset from between these chains.
So, for example, there could even be like a DEX where it's like, you know, I want to buy 100 of whatever token. I don't know. I can't name a token right now. Let's call it paper. I want to buy 100 paper. And
there's not enough tokens out there to name one.
There's so many, but I'm on the spot. I'm like, man, I can't think of a token. Wi-Fi. I want to buy some Wi-Fi. And there's low liquidity because it's spread out against, you know, across 10 different chains. They're trying to be on every chain or whatever. I don't know. That DEX could essentially look at all 10 of those chains. And it's as if those, you know, all that liquidity is together because it's saying, hey, I'm going to take 10% from here, 10% from here, 10% from here. And so I don't get as much slippage, and it's able to do a transaction tapping into all 10 of those liquidity sources. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly.
That's wild. And that's what I don't think most people understand is coming, because people are still talking about like, L2s are so fractured, you're fracturing liquidity, and the only way to do it would be to have it on one chain. And like, people can't even imagine what you're talking about is going to be here within the next year.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the thing. Like, I like to be very objective about like where things stand, right? And when people say fractured liquidity, I mean, the truth is it is fractured right now. And it's like a fair comment right now. But I think like when I think of building this technology, I'm not really thinking about what things look like in a year or 2 years. Like, we've got so much to build. And so the question is like, what do things look like when true mass adoption is here? And we've got, you know, tens of millions of people that are transacting continuously on these chains. And like, we've got a few years, let's be realistic, for that to play out. And therefore, we have a few years to build this all out. And so I think it's fair to say it's fragmented. It's just not going to stay that way.
And just to clarify, just so somebody can really imagine this, because I know people struggle to imagine what isn't today, but how things could be. What you're saying is that essentially you could abstract away the concept of bridging, because it's not like I'm going to go to a bridge and I'm going to be like, okay, I need to bridge my token from chain A to chain B. It's going to be less than 5 seconds, but I'm going to bridge. I could actually, an app developer can abstract away that stage to where when I go to do a swap or when I go to do a thing on chain A, it's bridging to chain B, but I don't know that's happening as a user. It's happening in the background, just in the same way that when I go to Amazon, it's using a bunch of different things all over the place I don't know about. I don't care about that. I'm just interacting with Amazon. I don't have to worry about that as the end user.
That's exactly right. I mean, I think it's like, look, I love Cosmos, by the way. I'm not saying anything bad about Cosmos, but when you think about Cosmos, think of like the opposite of that, right? Cosmos, it's like, oh, here's this chain. I'm going to this chain, and then I'm going across to this chain. And like it's very clearly laid out, and every token's labeled properly across all the chains, right? This idea is like, you don't have to worry about any of that. Now, part of this is like, we're talking about this a lot internally, is like how it is that we help like app builders kind of get there, because it is a different way for them to think. It is a different way for them to like present the kind of UI and UX. Same thing for wallets. So there is a part of this that's like, we need all the parts of the infrastructure to be like on board with this, but that's obviously part of what we're focused on helping others do as well.
You know, you mentioned that where's the alpha here? I'm looking for the alpha. I have been looking for somebody who's like, I'm building apps for Polygon 2.0 cross chain, like all these capabilities. Like, what's the DEX, or have you heard of anything on Polygon? Because I'm looking like everywhere for something, some sort of project that's tapping into this and leaning into it full force and saying, I'm building for this vision in the future, not building for, what's going on today.
We're actually working on that right now. Like, that's part of like the community work that we're doing, right? Is like helping bring the community in early so that they like see this. We have some like really good builders, like folks like QuickSwap. They deploy on basically every CDK. It's fantastic. It's really important right now with the like fragmented liquidity. It's important for them to actually do that. And I think like those are the type of projects that like they're going to fast forward. They're going to look at this and they're going to say, okay, that's no longer needed. Now, how do we build the best experience for like the feeling of one chain across many? And that's going to be exciting. But like, yeah, one of the things I focus on all the time with like our kind of PM team is like, hey, like, can we start thinking about like what things are going to look like in 8 to 9 months, so that when we kind of fast forward to that point in time, we've got a set of builders who fully understand that and what that's going to look like and have been building towards it. And so, yes, I think it's something that's crucial for us to focus on, and hopefully it'll play out right.
Yeah, because if you're a smart team right now, you'd be looking at what's being built and you're like, okay, you got OKX coming with their X1 chain. You got Polygon ZK EVM. You got the Validium chain, the proof of stake, the POS chain coming to becoming a Validium. And then you have all these other different chains. You have Immutables, gaming chain, all these other things that are launching. You'd be saying to yourself, okay, there's probably going to be a DEX aggregator that's going to aggregate for all these chains. Eventually, they're going to get network effects, and they're going to be like the one. And you'd want to be that one. You don't want to be like, hey, I'm just the DEX on X1. I'm just the DEX on Polygon POS. You want to be the DEX aggregator. So if you're smart, that's what you should be building right now. Because
I mean, it's exactly right. I say this all the time with respect to the staking hub that we're building. Right. So like the staking hub basically allows people. So usually you stake to one chain. The staking hub is going to allow like multi-chain staking. And so what you'll be able to do is, instead of taking your tokens and saying, hey, like I'm just staking to Polygon POS, you might say I'm staking to Polygon POS, but I'm also staking to, Immutable ZK VM, and I'm also staking here and there. And what that does is it obviously like diversifies where it is you're receiving fees from. And what I always say is, like, when you look at something novel like that, there's so much that can be built on top of that. And we like to bring people in early into the community so that they can do this. We're doing the same thing. We haven't talked about Polygon Miden. Miden is a completely different VM, which this is why people get confused, right? It's like there's a whole other thing. And that's why I left it out of like, what's Polygon 2.0? Because it's like too much if people think about it. But Polygon Miden is like an entirely new Miden VM that's being built. It's still a roll-up. It'll also plug into the AG layer, but just with a different VM. And what we have there is like, we're about to launch on testnet. And we have 2 to 3 projects that are coming in and basically saying, this is going to build an amazing order book DEX. Let us come and deal with all the difficulties that we need to deal with a protocol that hasn't even launched, but get way ahead and start building an order book DEX. Same thing from like a spot perspective, same thing from a perp perspective, tons of different like novel things that you can build. And if you're early, you're going to frankly build something that is way ahead of what everyone else can build. And so we love seeing kind of community members come in early and devs start building things that they do take some risk in doing it, but there's definitely like kind of getting ahead of others and doing it as well.
I literally feel like I'm a part of a secret club right now. I feel like, you guys are building Amazon over here, and like everyone else is like, meh, like I like Kmart. It's good enough. I don't really need this Amazon thing. I don't see the potential. Nobody's talking about it.
Don't be Sears. Don't be Sears.
Or Sears. My mind's boggled because I listen to so many different podcasts. Like I'm like in everything. And why is Polygon not the top of everyone's conversation? Because this is revolutionizing everything about the space. Why is everyone not talking about this? And that's why I want to do this podcast, because I'm like, it's too good to be true. I don't understand. Like I was expecting to ask you these questions and you'd be like, well, okay, it's sub 5 seconds, but here's the catch. And, this is just shocking to me. It's shocking to me that like, where's the fanfare? It's like the Bitcoin ETF, man. We knew it was coming. We knew it was coming for a long time. Nobody was talking about it till the last second. Maybe that's how I'll be with this, once it's approaching, people are gonna be like, wait a minute.
Yeah. I think the reality is when we we grew around like one chain, right? And when you suddenly have like such a diverse ecosystem, it does take a change in mindset, like how you actually approach that, right? And like our team, like at Polygon Labs, and how we tell this story, how we make people aware of it, and frankly, getting over prior perceptions of Polygon POS, it all takes a while. So like from my perspective, I'm kind of like, you know what, like I'm just going to be like very kind of calm, take my time on this. Like people will come around. I see it. Like if I think of like 6 months ago, Polygon was Polygon POS. That is it. And like now there's hardly a day on Twitter where people are not talking about Polygon CDK in one way or another. And with time, it's very much going to come. People talk about the Polygon ZK VM. They'll talk about the AG layer. And slowly, Polygon won't be a thing. There's just going to be a bunch of chains that is the entire Polygon ecosystem, and you won't be able to define Polygon as one chain. You'll define it as this entire thing brought together around this AG layer, because that is what technically brings it all together.
You keep talking about Polygon CDK. You've mentioned it a couple times. Let's go into that. Can you explain in more detail what is Polygon CDK? How does that work, and why are you excited about it?
Yeah, so Polygon CDK is just the chain development kit is what that stands for. It's very creative, of course. What it basically does is it says like, hey, you want to spin up a new chain because you believe that you want to control the environment in which you are going to be launching this chain. Whether that's you're worried about cost on another chain or throughput limitations, these are things that you want to control. So you say, I'm going to launch this myself. Now you could launch it as like a general purpose chain, which is like what Polygon ZK VM is, or you could launch it for like a specific type of application that you want to launch it for. And the nice thing about Polygon CDK is it doesn't require you to choose like one way to launch it. You get to choose what you want. You get to choose the client that you use to launch it with. You get to choose whether you want it to be a roll-up or you want it to be a validium. If you want it to be a validium, then you get to choose, do you want it to have local data availability? Do you want to use the staking hub in a few months for the data availability layer? Or do you want to use something like as the data availability committee? Or do you want to use something like Celestia that allows you to have like, a chain for data availability, or Near or Veil or EigenDA eventually. And so that's another option. And then the last option is what prover you want to use. We are working on more than one prover. Most people probably don't realize that. Most people don't even have a prover. We have multiple provers. All of these things, the question is like, why have this optionality? And the answer is they all have their own trade-offs. There's speed trade-offs, there's cost trade-offs, there's security trade-offs. And when you want to build a chain that is going to hold, $100, $500 million, and people are going to be doing DeFi transactions on them, you probably want a full roll-up. It's going to cost you a little bit more, but you're going to get like the full security of Ethereum. But then when you're like, hey, I want a chain for gaming, and people are going to be doing like sub $5 transactions, like you're okay taking slightly lower security by, instead of having data on Ethereum, having it with some late kind of local data availability or some other chain like Near or Celestia. And so those trade-offs allow you to build what you want. The nice thing that's happened when we back up quite a few months ago, you'd get to a point where like people would come to this and they'd be like, how do I deploy this on my own? And the nice thing is like the industry has developed a very robust set of like RaaS providers, roll up as a service, who basically launch these for you. You don't need to run any of that infrastructure on your own. You don't need to know anything. They understand it. And we actually do this very carefully. Like when somebody says, I'm using this RaaS provider, we actually get our team to hop on calls with them and just say like, hey, what do you know about CDK? And we basically help them get up to speed on CDK. That way, when chains are deployed by this RaaS provider, they're like deployed smoothly without any issues. And they understand like all of the limitations and benefits of CDK. So that's kind of CDK as a whole.
So with CDK, you could deploy, for example, on Polygon's, in Polygon's universe of chains, you could have like the SVM, or you could have like maybe a move-based chain. Or you could have, maybe something tied in with IBC. I don't know. It's just like, it's basically all these different flavors of like what you could build and all this experimentation, so that instead of Polygon being like a bunch of EVM, Polygon POS type like clones, you have sort of this universe of really diverse, unique chains that allow maybe for use cases that you couldn't get on a single chain.
Yeah. And we see this with like, you'll see it, you can already see it now with like, okay, Polygon CDK has like the ZKVM, like EVM client, EVM. We'll also have the Miden VM on there. We'll also see like non-EVM chains, as you were kind of like touching. Like, so Near is building, like working on ZK Wasm. And the entire point there is so that we can actually have like Cosmos chains, non-EVM Cosmos chains, who can plug into kind of the CDK. And they would use that prover and be part of this aggregation layer. So you actually have like Cosmos chains who can actually share in that liquidity with this using the same prover as you have. And so the ecosystem that can like emerge around this is huge as long as they use the same proving systems. That's all that's required.
And I think that's maybe where some people don't understand why do we need a lot of chains? Why do we need more than one chain? It's the idea that like you're building unique use case. I would give the example that early on in the internet, there's two different competing visions for the internet. Some people actually used to think that why do you need a bunch of websites? You could have everything on AOL. And so AOL went after this vision of like, we got the weather, we got your chat, we got your email, everything is on AOL, the news. You don't need to go anywhere else. This is the internet, guys. And you know, but different websites allow for really unique use cases. And you have to build websites differently for those use cases. You can't have, you know, Google on the same on Facebook, and you can't have Facebook on Amazon. And like all these things require really different setups and infrastructure to run the way that they do. And so the idea of having all these chains is that you could have all these different unique use cases, like privacy. Like we need, you know, we don't have privacy on chain. What if we had a privacy chain in the Polygon ecosystem? You mentioned gaming. Everyone building a game that I've talked to, they want their own chain. They need really specific use cases, or they need it built a really specific way. And so they're building their own chains. They can launch on Polygon and then tap into this entire ecosystem of users and liquidity and all this stuff. And so it just enables a lot more diversity, but that makes the system as a whole a lot stronger. You mentioned Polygon having like a native DA similar to maybe Celestia and Eigen. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I haven't heard a lot about that.
I think there's a few things that are interesting. One, which is not what you're touching on, is I just heard of some project that is using Polygon POS for data availability, which was like never intended, but like, sure, you can use it for that. Like why not? It is super cheap. So why not? But the way that this is part of like the staking hub. So right now, when you think of staking in the Polygon ecosystem, all you think about is you think of a set of validators for Polygon POS. We're thinking of a staking hub that allows for staking for any of these CDK chains, right? Eventually, people are going to want decentralized sequencers, decentralized provers. And so if you make the staking hub available so that anyone can stake to any of these chains, then you have that option. But really, when you think about it more broadly, the validators can provide more services than just sequencing, proving transactions. Why don't they just provide data availability as a service? And so that's really what it is. And when the staking hub comes out, what you'll actually effectively see is like a set of validators who get to choose what service they want to provide. Do I want to provide data availability to this chain? Do I want to provide, a validation service to this chain? And they'll basically subscribe to them, and then they'll provide that. And so that really is kind of that DA that is available in the staking hub is really validators choosing to provide that for a chain.
You guys are getting a new token. So right now it's MATIC. It's going to be POL. And that does a lot more than what MATIC currently does. MATIC's currently used for validators on the POS chain, but POL is used for a lot of these different things you're talking about. So I was going to talk about this a little later, but I feel like, now that you're mentioning these things, how does POL tie into all these things?
So I think POL is effectively, it enables some of what we just talked about, but I think the simplest way to think about POL is like a one-to-one version of MATIC, with the only difference being that there is a certain amount of inflation. And the inflation, which ends up being kind of controlled by others, is something that allows for the decentralization of these CDK chains. So if you think of like Cosmos is a good example of this right now. When you want to spin up a new Cosmos chain, what do? You work with like their SDK, And then what you end up doing is when you launch, you have a set of validators and you mint a new token to like with massive massive percentage inflation, because like there is no fees to reward anyone. I think like the only actual very interesting, by the way, example where this was not the case is DYDX, where they didn't actually have any inflation whatsoever, partially because they had an existing token and a brand, and they launched and people just validators received fees right off the cuff. But most of the time you have like a very low float token that is just being inflated massively. The benefit when you launch CDK and you say, hey, I want to decentralize this, you don't even need your own token, because Pol ends up being that token that through that kind of inflation ends up being used as a reward to those validators. And so Pol ends up being like, we kind of call it like a hyper productive token, because you have that option to actually stake to multiple different chains and secure those networks and receive rewards. And the interesting thing about that, right, with Pol is that when you do that, right now, if you stake on Polygon POS, you're taking like, let's call it like all the risk of transactions happening on Polygon POS and Polygon POS being successful. And if you were to take like any other individual chain, that's really what you're relying on. Unless you're like, again, inflating the token away a ton. And so when you get to the staking hub and you use Pol for staking, you no longer are like, oh, I have to rely on just Polygon POS being successful. You can say, I think immutable ZKVM, when they want to decentralize their sequencer, is going to be successful. And we will be paid fees for this. Now, the interesting thing for something like immutable is Pol will be used for staking, but the fees will be paid in IMX tokens. And so you as a validator are staking Pol, you're receiving Pol from the POS chain, you're receiving IMX tokens, and you're basically receiving a diversified stream of fees from just staking Pol. And so that's the really interesting thing about Pol, is this like very kind of diversified stream of effectively rewards that you receive from these different chains.
So this almost reminds me of like a mini eigenlayer type feel, like in the sense that you're taking this one token, you're staking it with a validator or whatever, and that validator is validating not only for one chain, but validating for multiple chains that you're, I'm guessing, opting into.
Yeah.
As a
yeah. So we actually referred to it as restaking. In public, like in our blog posts and stuff, I refer to it as like multi-chain staking, notwithstanding the fact that we do refer to it as restaking. And the reason for that is because the way we're initially going to launch it, I would say, is like the most conservative, responsible way. If you have like 100 Pol, for example, what we're going to say is, hey, you can do like 80 Pol over here and 20 Pol over here. We will not say, hey, you're going to go stake 100 Pol over there, and then you get a new token that you can then use to go stake it on this other place. That would be more like kind of like eigenlayer-like. Now, what governance will be able to control when we launch this is they'll be able to change that. They could say, hey, we actually want you to be able to effectively restake. So instead of 100% of your Pol being used to stake these different chains, you can use 105%. And effectively, the way that you would do that would be through like a new token that would essentially be restaked. I personally am not like a huge fan of that. Like, to me, like, secure the network optimally, and that is use 100% of your stake to secure the network. And when you reach 100%, like, you're done. It's still beneficial because you do get these diverse revenue streams, but there is a world in which governance could, when this is launched, choose to actually kind of implement something very much like restaking.
Just so I understand, what you're saying is, okay, so say I had 100 Pol tokens, I'm choosing a percentage of those Pol tokens to stake to different essentially chains. And it's not like all 100 of those Pol token, like with Eigenlayer, if I had, my validator, my 32 ETH spun up, I could validate for ETH. And then with that same 32 ETH, I could go validate for chain B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And they're all using the same 32 ETH. But what you're saying is it's actually using separate Pol.
That's exactly right. So think of it as like diversification rather than leverage. It's like maybe the best way to think about it. Now, again, governance could end up implementing leverage in addition to diversification. That's just not how we're going to initially launch it.
So I have 100 Pol staking 100 chains, one of those chains gets slashed because I do something bad or whatever, I don't know. Then I lose one pull, and now I have 99 pull. Okay.
Exactly.
That's cool. That's a different approach to it. But still, man, so many people right now, you guys have like the super narrative. That's what it feels like. The super narrative, because like every narrative I can think of.
We have the super narrative that we've never conveyed well.
I guess not, because you have DA, you have this, eigenlayer kind of feeling thing. You have a parallel execution. You have like all these different, the super chain, but like better and crazier, interop. You have all these different things going for you. And it's like real world assets. You have the Libre thing. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. That you guys just announced recently.
Libre, yeah.
Which I want to get into that.
Sure. Whenever you want.
Right now. Tell me about Libre and what you guys are doing with that.
Yeah. So the way that we look at like the CDK ecosystem is like, first, we don't control it, right? It's going to grow as it does. But in an ideal world, what you have is you actually have chains that cover like all of these different use cases, right? And so like immutable covered gaming, and like you've got, Manta that does a lot in DeFi, and like, so you get like these different chains. And Libre is like a chain that is very focused on just bringing institutions into like on-chain. And so what that really looks like is obviously through tokenization of assets. I think like people like to just say RWAs because it sounds like a broader set of things that will be used in DeFi. And we could stick with RWAs. But ultimately, like their idea is like, hey, we've got a bunch of like wealth advisors out there and institutions, and eventually these institutions, like all the assets are going to be tokenized. And when all those assets are tokenized, well, we want them to be tokenized on Libre is how they're thinking about it. But then what you want is you actually want like activity on that chain that goes beyond just like tokenizing an asset. Like you actually want something, right? So you want like wealth advisors, for example, to be able to like create portfolios, rebalance portfolios, all of these things that like I don't think people envision how much like transactions it actually ends up driving. And eventually what you see is that you will see institutions that are going to like open things up. So like Libre, when it launches, like I would expect it to be completely closed, right? Like it'll be completely permissioned, and that's what it is. But the nice thing about something like Libre is that it doesn't need to stay that way. Eventually what they can do is plug into the aggregator layer, and now it allows for those assets to actually be used in other networks, such as in DeFi. And so I don't expect a chain like that to actually remain in that way. And we're actually seeing this, by the way. It's I don't know if you saw this today, but like Nike with .swoosh. So one of the fascinating things that we get all the time is, hey, you've got tons of enterprises. And what does that really do? Like they don't do anything. And I said, you're not really understanding like the bet on enterprises. It is not, I mean, some of them are pretty impressive, honestly, in what they do today. But the bet is what they're going to do in a few years, right? And Nike is like a great example of .swoosh. Like they just said, like it used to be a completely closed ecosystem. And now .swoosh NFTs are going to be allowed to be traded on like open marketplaces. And that's the kind of like evolution that I expect to see from like enterprises, like more and more as they get more comfortable. And what that means is like with time, more and more transaction being driven on chain instead of off chain. And suddenly when you've got a boatload of enterprises that are sitting on your chain who initially were doing a lot off chain and are starting to drive it more and more on chain, you get a kind of proliferation of actually on-chain transactions. And to me, this is the same for these, like something like Libre. You're going to see tokenization pick up. A lot of it, in my opinion, is probably going to happen on something like Libre. And then eventually that's going to get opened up with getting more comfortable with regulations and things like that. You open it up and you start having those used in like a much broader set of ecosystems, including DeFi ecosystems, which is the core thing. Like if you can get traditional assets tokenized and used in DeFi, that is obviously a very positive thing, obviously risks associated with it. But like ultimately, that's how DeFi ends up growing in a very meaningful way.
Larry Fink going on recently and talking about how he wants everything tokenized. Tokenization is the future. And, we had a big debate on Twitter. Everyone's saying, well, they're going to do that on Ethereum. And then other people are saying, no, they're going to do that on Solana. And then other people are saying, no, they're going to do it on my favorite chain. But in reality, like you mentioned, they're going to do it on their own privately controlled chain. But why wouldn't they do it on something like what Polygon's building, where they could in the future tap that into the rest of the ecosystem. That makes so much sense to me. And you guys are kind of like the king of enterprise. Like every like big deal that people are like, how did they get that? Like Instagram, like all these things that you guys have done. You guys are great at that. You're great at tapping into these like legacy companies and saying, hey, work with us. And for whatever reason, they're always like, yeah, we want to work with Polygon. And I remember this like throughout the bear market, people were just like kind of blown away. Like, how the heck did Polygon score this? How are they doing this? Like, who is their sales team? These guys rock. But
we definitely have a good team, but a lot of it is people don't give credit to Polygon POS. It is a very easy, cheap chain to use. And that ends up mattering. And then you join on top of that a lot of it's inertia, right? Like enterprises look at enterprises. We're pretty smart about like looking at areas, right? Like we did the Starbucks deal because what we understood is loyalty points are actually valuable. And people still, I don't think, fully understand that a loyalty point is basically just money. And when suddenly these massive companies who most of the things that they do are paid for in their loyalty points effectively, what you've got is basically a massive payments network that comes on chain. And so we focused on something like loyalty. We're like, hey, if we can nail Starbucks, then everyone else will want to work with us. And that is how it plays out. Because like everybody goes, Starbucks went to Polygon. Starbucks had a good experience on Polygon. So we're going to do the exact same thing, right? And you saw this like brand NFTs as well, like non-loyalty, like they do kind of the same thing. And there's more things like, I think Fox doing this with, Verify, putting like essentially like actual hashes of like media on chain so that everybody knows like this is real media. It's not AI generated kind of media. Well, when people look at Fox and say, hey, I'm doing that on Polygon, others are going to follow, in my opinion. We will see. But that's how it's working.
And there you go with Libre. You guys, getting your foot in the door and everyone else is going to be like, oh, they're doing that with Polygon. We want to do that with Polygon, but we want it to be our own chain. And again, like you said, they start out private, eventually they go public, and then suddenly all this liquidity. And that's another thing. You're going to build such a network effect of liquidity. Geez, like X1, POS, like every single one that adds to the ecosystem expands the liquidity that can be tapped into because it's so easy to move between chains. It's not fractured anymore. So that becomes a liquidity pit at some point. And it's like, why would we launch that's why people launch on Ethereum today, even though the gas fees are really high, is because all the liquidity. So why at a certain point would anyone ever launch anywhere else when, you guys have like billions and billions of liquidity, maybe trillions one day. And, this other chain just launched and they got like, $100 million. It's just going to get crazy.
You nailed it. There's nothing to say. Like you completely nailed it, which is right. When all these chains have all this liquidity, every other chain wants to come there as well. And so that's why that aggregation layer is so important, because when you bring all that liquidity together, everyone wants to share in that liquidity.
How many chains are looking at launching on Polygon that you know of?
I think OKX just by default is super exciting with X1, right? It's 50 million plus users, maybe 60 million plus coming on chain. And the nature of their users is very different from many others, but it like captures like the entire Asian market, which I think is like incredibly active on chain in a way that like is not necessarily true, frankly, in the US market. So I think that one is super exciting. We've got, it's hard not to mention some of the obvious. Immutable, like they are, they're doing so well on the gaming front. I think people don't realize when you like put Polygon's gaming with Immutable's gaming, it's not even like it's just like totally off the charts in terms of activity over there. Manta is leaving OP, coming over to Polygon CDK. I think they've got 900 million in TVL right now, something of that nature. So that's I think a very big one. I think A-Star, which is already like has historically been a huge kind of L1, leaving Polkadot and coming over to Polygon, I think is another one that like in kind of the Asian market attracts like a lot of developers and users. So I think that's like really interesting. We've got some like app specific ones that are coming up very soon. There's a DeFi one that is going to be super exciting. It's actually an app specific chain There's one in the entertainment industry, a very well-known brand that is going to be like super exciting. So there's like a few more that are coming. But those are like the key big ones. But ultimately, the way that I'm looking at CDK is like, ultimately it's a community that all benefits from each other. Like what I mean by that is like when you plug in to the same aggregation layer, your growth is just benefits from the growth of others, right? Whether it's so if you're the liquidity hub, you're going to benefit from that. But if you're not the liquidity hub, you also benefit from that liquidity hub. And so the way that I've been looking at it is like, everyone's like, hey, well, you know, how does POS fit in or ZKVM fit into this broader like CDK kind of strategy? Like, don't you want it to win? And my answer is like, no, like I want them like all to win. Like I honestly don't care if POS and ZKVM are this tiny sliver of it. I want that entire thing to win because POS and ZKVM are going to be so much better off when everybody else is winning as well, which is why I think I tweeted at one point something like, every time a CDK like launches, it feels like I have a baby, even though I'll never have a baby in my life. It's just kind of how it feels because they're all like part of that same like family. So that gets me like super excited for kind of what's going to come with CDK. Because the truth is like, there's going to be like, it sounds crazy now. And like, I used to like go nuts when people would say things like this, but like, there's going to be like thousands and thousands of chains. Like there will for sure be at least 100 CDKs that launch like next year, this year, 2024. And so like you'll have, that's just going to accelerate. And you've got lots of launching on like other chains as well, right? And so like you will have thousands of chains like in the CDK ecosystem, all serving different purposes. And it's going to be super cool kind of seeing that come together around like this aggregation layer.
I think you hit the nail on the head too when you're talking about like app chains and thousands of chains. And people don't wrap their heads around that because again, they're thinking as it is today, and it would be so annoying to have thousands of chains and you have to bridge 10 minutes between it and you're paying an $8 gas fee. Yeah, that is annoying. Who would want a world like that? That's not what you're saying though. You're talking about a world where you don't even know you're bridging and it's less than 5 seconds. Less than 5 seconds. Like a transaction today, when I do a transaction on Ethereum, like it could take 30 seconds or, longer. Back in the day, it could take a couple hours, back in 2017. So you're talking about like a whole different world. And in that world, an app having its own chain makes a lot of sense. Like, why wouldn't you want your own fully customizable chain? And there doesn't need to be a lot of activity on some of these chains. You could have 2 or 3 apps. It doesn't matter because there's no liquidity walls anymore. There's no walls to liquidity. Like it can freely flow. If users want to bring money there, it's easy. It's just seamless. It just pours right in there. So you judge the system as a whole and you say, as a whole, and we're gonna have to come up with new metrics to judge these kind of things because people are gonna still be looking at like, oh, the validium chain for Polygon is gonna have this much TVL, this. But really, what we're gonna need to do is look at Polygon as a whole, and like the whole of Polygon has this TVL because nothing else will make sense.
Actually, you like totally nailed it again, right? Which is, I've been thinking about this a lot. Is how do you actually get the entire ecosystem to be recognized as one? Because it is a very different like thought process from when you're like, oh, this chain has this and this chain has this. And it's kind of like, well, it doesn't matter what any one of those chains have. It actually matters what this looks like in the aggregate. Cosmos actually does that like a decently well. I can't remember like the name of the site, but it's like maybe like Map of Chains or something like that, where they actually like lay out the constellation. You still don't have that like great unified feel yet in the Cosmos ecosystem. It's like, it's unified, but not well. But they do lay that out like really well. And I think that's the idea that like we need to bring to the Ethereum ecosystem. I actually think it's something I've been saying like lately that Ethereum actually has missed, which is that Ethereum needs to stop being defined as Ethereum. Yeah. It needs to be defined as Ethereum plus Polygon POS plus Polygon ZKVM plus OP plus, Base plus Arbiter, like go on and that, like that's what Ethereum actually is. And eventually we'll have a day, hopefully, where all of these different, whether it's Arbitrum, OP, all of them, we're all interconnected. It won't just be a CDK world. I think we're pretty far away from that right now. Like, but I think that's really important for like the Ethereum ecosystem as a whole. Is for like right now the bridges that we rely on, they're less secure, they're slower, and we need to get to a ZK unified world, which I think is where we're going to end up.
I agree wholeheartedly. And everything we've been talking about today is a part of Ethereum. Like a lot of these things you're talking about built on Ethereum. And that's where I think a lot of people are missing this transition from, and they did it last cycle too. So you had like in 2017, things were a certain way. And then in 2021, they were way different. I didn't do anything on chain in 2017. There's a couple things I had to do on chain. I was like, this is weird.
Come on, you sent some ETH so you could get some random token at one point.
Yeah.
You had to have done that.
And I was using my Ether wallet was the site I used back then. And it was like, that's what you did on chain. And I was like doing it to stake stuff. And I was like confused. And then, but 2021 was like this whole new era of like, and you bought everything on Binance back in 2017. So or Binance or like Bittrex and these different sites. And then 2021 came along and it's like in the US, you couldn't get access to all these tokens. So you had to go on Uniswap. And I remember actually the first chain that I used outside of Ethereum was Polygon. I bridged over and I was like, whoa, this is really cheap. At the time, there wasn't a ton to do on Polygon. I had quick swap. There's a couple things I could do. There wasn't a lot of tokens or activity back then, but it blew my mind. And it was like this paradigm shift. And what you're describing is this whole new paradigm shift of like, the class of 2021 doesn't understand what this next class is going to go through because it's a whole different world. And that's why I said I feel like I'm a part of a secret club because I understand it. I see this, and I feel like the market hasn't quite caught on to what's coming because it's a lot different than what is today.
Yeah, it's funny how we get defined and shaped by the class that we came into crypto in. Like it's like a totally different world how you think about things. Like I got in like early 2017, and so I'm defined by that like 2017 class, and like I look at things so differently from that like 2021 DeFi class, and even more differently from like the late 2021, early 2022 like NFT class. And I think this next class that comes in is going to be and similarly defined in a very different way.
There's always something to catch you off guard to where you think you understand things, and then all the activity happens over here, and you're like, wait, that caught me off guard. And I think for something like Polygon, the transition, probably the moment that people realize what's going on is going to be that transition to the POL token. So when that's finally like a wide thing where people are holding POL instead of MATIC, it's kind of going to be like a new feeling token to them. And they're going to be like, hey, what is this? Let's take a deeper look. So when does that happen? Do you guys have a date or like a time frame of like, I know right now some of the contracts are live, but it's not really fully official, or how does that work?
Yeah, right now it's just like POL is actually like live, and that's basically it. The transition like will happen when the staking hub launches, and so that should be in about 4 months or so. And when that actually maybe 5 months, 4 or 5 months, when that launches, I think that's when people should be looking really hard at like, okay, let's get MATIC over into POL. POL will become like the gas token for Polygon POS, whereas right now it's MATIC. MATIC right now is used for staking. That won't be the case anymore. POL will be used for staking. And so that's really like the time where we'll see like that entire shift from like POL, from MATIC over to POL.
And what about going from the POS chain to the Validium chain? When do you expect that to happen?
Yeah, I think that's one that like when we prioritize everything, the way we look at it is like that's probably like lower priority. And the reason simply it's a chain that's it works well. We've made a lot of changes to it. People are happy with it. So when we think of like, we got the staking hub, we've got the aggregation layer, we've got CDK to continue to develop along with everyone else building in there. Kind of the ZK part, like the ZK-ifying the POS chain is really like the kind of last part of that. Ultimately, I think it's like pretty important because there's a lot of liquidity on there. And so we want that liquidity to be part of that aggregation layer. And so that's something that I think like late this year at the earliest, but likely like earlier next year is when that kind of POS moving to a Validium is going to happen because we're just prioritizing other things before it.
That makes sense. I was going to say, like, once you have that sub 5-second bridging, you're going to want the massive amount of liquidity that's sitting on the POS chain to be tappable for all these other chains, because that's got to be the biggest one currently within the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, once Manta actually like plugs in the prover, I think it will now. Well, no, it should still be. It'll be second, but I think by the time we get there, I'm guessing it'll be second or third. And again, as I said earlier, to me, that's like fantastic, right? It's like this is great. Like we have like that'll mean we'll have like 3 to 5 billion, maybe 6-7 billion by then at least of liquidity. Like fantastic, I love it.
That is fantastic. And just to explain for anyone maybe doesn't understand what a validity, like how the Polygon chain is going to change, essentially all that it means is it's going to be upgraded with kind of your guys' plugging into your ZK system for one. So plugging into the aggregator layer, different things like that. But a validium just means that instead of being like a full-fledged L2, which is using Ethereum for DA, it's going to be using a separate DA source. And there's a lot of chains that are launching. This is like a pretty popular thing with that's happening right now. It just makes the transactions really cheap.
I mean, ultimately, I think every chain that launches with low cost like transactions for users is going to have to be of Validium. And that's okay, because like lower security for lower risk, why not? But that's why we made like ZKVM like a full blown roll up with data availability on Ethereum, was like we said, like, hey, we already have this cheap chain that kind of does make some trade-offs with Polygon POS. We can upgrade it to a Validium. Why not have a full roll-up as well? And that's where Polygon ZKVM comes in.
And you mentioned it earlier too, the MATIC token becomes the POL token. This isn't a new token as in like there's going to be two ecosystem tokens. It's that MATIC and POL are the same thing. You're going to switch MATIC into POL. And so if you're around in 2017, you did this a bunch where like mainnets went live and you had to transition your token to the new token. But maybe this newer class hasn't done it as much, where you're going to basically, there'll be some sort of contract where you send in your MATIC, it gets burned and you're issued POL. Is that basically the idea?
Yeah. I mean, that'll effectively happen when you bridge into the ecosystem and you bridge out, it'll automatically get swapped at that time. And so that it makes it like a very seamless like experience for the users. They don't even need to like know that they're doing it's like irrelevant because it basically is irrelevant. And so, yeah, it'll be like that one-to-one kind of change.
1-to-1. And there's a lot of people that get afraid about it. They're like, oh, if I have $1,000 in MATIC and POL comes out, is it going to be like 1-to-2, 1-to-3, you know, like, and my 1,000 instantly becomes 500. And no, it's going to be 1-to-1 token where it's literally the same thing, except they have a different ticker and they have a universe of different use cases for POL that didn't exist for MATIC. So it is a massive, in my opinion, it's a massive upgrade for MATIC. Whenever I talk about Polygon, I always get like a couple comments, a couple people saying something about like, Polygon's garbage because it's super centralized. And they're probably referring to the POS chain as what they're specifically commentating on, because they probably don't have any idea what's going on with the rest of the stuff. So I was going to ask, for one, maybe your response to that, but also this new ecosystem. You have this aggregator layer, all this stuff. How would you respond to somebody who's saying like, how decentralized is this? How credibly neutral is this new system? And how would you maybe explain that to somebody who is newer and doesn't understand?
I mean, look, I think the core of the decentralization around Polygon POS is the set of validators, right? So because it's based on like the Cosmos SDK, like you basically have a limitation that ends up like creating issues once you go over like a lot more than 100 validators, right? So there's about like a set of validators, all of which can be seen, different validators in the ecosystem. And so that ends up being decentralized because you need something like 66 and 2/3% of the validators to actually kind of transact on the chain. And so that's where kind of the decentralization comes from. The question on centralization always comes from, well, what about the bridge? And this thing that's reality, whether it's a sidechain or an L2, there's bridges across everywhere in the Ethereum ecosystem. And the reason why that's true is because you need to make changes based off of changes made to Ethereum itself. And so when I say what I was saying earlier, like, hey, I think about things on like a much longer time frame, there will be a time where Ethereum's going to like harden. And there will be a time where you're going to get rid of those keys for those contracts. And they will be completely decentralized just as much as Ethereum. And so we're kind of in this like centralized point where there is like a point that has centralization, which is like the bridge. And so there's things that we're looking at doing. So first, we are expanding like the governance all around that. And so right now, like the set of multi-sig holders is expanding. Those are kind of like the key things that you see in like every kind of L2 ecosystem. I think once we see kind of the staking hub come out, well, sorry. So that's like the Polygon like POS side of things. Like ultimately, there's a difference between like the chain and the bridge. And the bridge is one where we're always trying to like look at how can we kind of expand that multi-sig. But then eventually you've got the chain itself that has the set of validators. And then you've got the rest of it, which is like CDKs that end up launching, as well as kind of like ZKVM. And what those all are right now, as it is in all other kind of L2 ecosystems, is like a centralized sequencer and a centralized prover. Now, the question that's actually really interesting that people don't talk about enough is, does that matter? And naturally, your reaction, if you're like, came to the space like me for the decentralization, is you say, well, yeah, that's a massive problem. And the truth is, no, it's not really actually a problem if there's certain features that are actually like built into this, right? So, for example, if you have a full rollup, you actually should not care. Why is it? Well, first of all, you get to things like transaction ordering. Well, guess what? Like, listen to what's MEV. Like your transactions already get ordered on all of these systems. So what's the difference? It's one party, one validator, or here one running sequencer who's going to sequence your transactions. And so what you hope is that they're sequenced in a consistent way, and they should be sequenced in a consistent way. Then you get things like, okay, well, what about like censorship resistance? And that's where like having data on Ethereum is very important, because if we like shut down the sequencer and you've got forced transactions, you can actually just exit the rollup to Ethereum. And so you still have that censorship resistance that kind of exists nonetheless. And so like ultimately, like when you start looking at like these features that you want, like transparency, you can get the transparency too. So like all of the features that you get from decentralization, you get it by putting data on a decentralized system such as Ethereum. And therefore, it doesn't actually matter. Now, that being said, I say that a little bit tongue-in-cheek that it doesn't matter. The truth is there's certain reasons why you might care about decentralization anyway. And that's where the staking hub comes in, where you are going to be able to decentralize sequencers, decentralize validators, and you don't decentralize provers, where you're not going to have to run them in a centralized way. If you do care, if you're like, hey, I don't buy this. I'm not sure why you wouldn't buy it, but if you don't buy it, you could just say, cool, we'll run it in a decentralized way anyway. And so that's like the full picture on like the centralization, decentralization, like across the Polygon ecosystem as a whole.
So just kind of maybe summarize, you were saying that the big thing that people like to pin on with centralization has to do with the current POS chain, but specifically the bridge, which if people don't understand how a normal bridge works, you're not actually moving a token from chain A to chain B in most instances. So for example, if I were to try to send, I don't know, like Uniswap, their token, the Uni token, from ETH to, I don't know if it works like this for Polygon, but I'll just say it for this example. ETH to Polygon through a bridge, typically what happens is on chain A, the Uniswap token goes into a contract. That gets locked. On chain B, basically a receipt is minted saying, hey, this is Uniswap on this chain, but it's not actually the Uniswap token. That's held in a contract on chain A. And that's why these contracts get really big and bloated, and a lot of money gets locked up in them, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's they're a honeypot where all these hackers want to come in and like say, hey, like look at all this money. And if they exploit that, it just basically makes the tokens on chain B, those receipts are now worthless because they point to something that doesn't exist anymore. And so that is how all bridges today work. And there's a lot of solutions happening around this, a lot of cool ideas where people are saying, hey, what if we use native assets? So instead of Uniswap, you would go, hey, I'm going to trade my Ethereum for some MATIC on Polygon, and then that Polygon gets traded for, X asset on Polygon network or whatever. So it's native to native. There's a lot of different ways that people are approaching it, but he's saying that's the criticism. As far as it is the bridge and a multi-sig around that, which is how most bridges are today. But it's not the same criticism for the new ecosystem. The new ecosystem is quite a bit different, and there are criticisms around the sequencer and different things like that. But they're like high-level arguments of like, maybe this matters, maybe it doesn't matter at all. It has to do with ordering transactions, and is it okay if that's centralized? maybe that isn't something that it matters. Maybe it's like a government, you don't want it to have too much power. And if they're deciding, who gets to name the latest lemonade brand, maybe that doesn't matter. It's like an obscure, weird thing that doesn't like gather power to themselves and allow them to, ruin your lives. That's kind of the point. That's kind of a weird analogy, but
I love the analogy. But yeah, no, the big picture, I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. There's so many things that are happening at Polygon, and I am a little bit like almost overwhelmed because, like I said, you guys have the super narrative. You guys are hitting every single thing. What am I missing? What am I not tackling that's cool about Polygon happening right now? I have a lot of podcast discussions. There's just like 3 or 4 things to talk about. You guys have like a million, and I don't even know what to hit. So what am I missing that you're excited about?
Yeah, no, I think like overall, we did a good job of kind of walking through everything. I think the one thing that I touched on that we didn't really talk about in detail is like Polygon Miden. And it's because it's like out there as this new thing. And I think the only plug I'll give over there, because it's really unique, is that like, first of all, Polygon Miden is developed like completely in the open, like literally like all the chats, like everything is done on Discord that people can listen into. I think like the percentage of contributions from like external parties that are completely unrelated to us is like pretty like, I don't know, maybe 15 to 20% of like the contributions are just open source contributions. So like the involvement of the community in the development of Miden is like super, super cool. But then the things that Miden actually allows you to do based on being a completely different VM is like very unique. So first, like privacy is going to be like a built-in feature to Miden. So it allows for privacy. Second is the way that transactions actually happen. So like, on like the EVM, you send an asset to somebody else and they get that asset. The way that it works on Miden is more like, it's like very like asset based. Is like you essentially post the kind of existence of this asset and somebody else can like essentially like, and we refer to it as like a note, and somebody can essentially come and like consume that note. The point being though, that when you like actually look at the architecture, there's certain applications that can be built that like you definitely could not build anywhere else. And one example of that is like an order book DEX that I was like referencing like previously. Because one of the core features of Miden is what we refer to as like client side proving. So like usually you have like a prover that you're not running. On Miden, you can like your phone can operate as a prover. And so you are proving your own transactions, which also means that you can like edit your own transactions. And if you think about this in like the order book context, you place a transaction, but cancel, you need to like change those orders all the time, especially if you're like a market maker, but like any like active trader falls in that category. You can't really do that on Ethereum, and you'd frankly even have trouble putting the entire thing on something like Polygon. And so you end up having like partially like on-chain, off-chain kind of order books. Miden, because like you're literally placing orders on your own system, is something that you can like edit like on an ongoing basis. And so it allows for like a set of applications such as like a central limit order book to be built that is very unique and couldn't be used elsewhere. And then when you think of that and you layer on privacy, you're like, so you can actually have like a central limit order book where market makers don't actually have to have all their strategies exposed to the world because they can actually keep those transactions private. And so I'm super excited about Miden. It's something that like won't be on mainnet till like the end of this year, but that's like the one part of like the Polygon ecosystem that like doesn't get enough like attention because there's so much else going on. And so yeah, that's like an interesting tidbit for folks. Pay attention to Polygon Miden.
I mean, I feel like the entire Polygon ecosystem doesn't get enough attention, but yeah, even within that bubble, like Miden, this is the first I've read it on the website, but it's the first I've really heard about it. I haven't seen any threads or anything on that. So that's pretty exciting. Well, one thing we didn't talk about, which I always forget about, is Polygon Identity. What even is that? What's going on with that?
I mean, the key to on-chain identity ends up being like the zero knowledge proofs, right? And so that is what we are good at. And actually, one of the teams that joined us when we brought on the ZK teams was actually very much initially focused on identity. And so Polygon ID is one of the only actual live working like identity solutions. Like we actually use it for like hackathons and stuff. It's kind of like dog fooding concept, right? And so like people, there's the idea of like you still have a centralized party that like is going to check data. But what they do is they create like an on-chain credential. That's a credential that now you can prove any of the data that this like centralized party holds without actually needing to reveal the information, right? So if you think about this for like, there's key things that this is like really important for that like gets ignored. I actually think like chains that solve identity are going to be in a really, really good spot because we think about it purely from like a KYC perspective often, but that's not really the interesting use case. The interesting use case is Sybil resistance because you don't have any Sybil resistance on chain. So when you think of like airdrops, like how do you actually like improve airdrops? And the answer is you actually tie identities. Now, the problem for now is that all of these identities are being tied like off chain. Now, this is still better, right? Like usually when you do something off chain, you need to like send it to tons of different parties. Here, you just send it to one. Okay, but it's still like off chain. What's going to be really interesting is when we actually have good on chain identity solutions, right? And that might not be like your typical identity, right? It might be reputation, something like that. But you can actually tie that to one person. You can then create a proof of it. And then you can use that throughout kind of like the different ecosystems. Once you can do that and you can actually prevent like Sybil attacks, things start getting like a lot more interesting, whether it's like airdrops or just like, think of like your typical Web2 stuff. When somebody comes to use an application, like what do? You like reward them for certain behavior, you create certain like promos and you you engage with those users. You can't do that now because like the second that the cost of a transaction is less than the actual amount that you're going to receive, you're just going to get like attacked and attacked by the exact same user again and again. And so once you have identity, you actually solve that and now everybody can do things. And so that's where Polygon ID like comes in. It's basically an identity solution that already exists and most people just don't realize that it's live and being used. But it's there. And there are some DAOs that I'm hearing that are going to start using it, which is cool. So that's Polygon ID.
That product alone, like you talked about, you talked about like Sybil resistance, but I'm thinking like AI. I'm thinking, all the craziness that's about to hit, and identity, I feel like is like the crux of that. I feel like you could have a crypto project that's like a $500 billion project in the future just based around identity. And I look at like so many things you guys are doing, and I'm like, that one feature you have is like OKX with their X1 exchange, right? Not that they compare in any other way, but last cycle you had a BNB chain as a $100 billion chain. OKX, kind of like this cycle's, BNB chain. That's one little facet of what is a part of the Polygon ecosystem. Boom. That's, then you have Polygon Identity. You have, parallelizing the EVM. You have this interop layer. You have the institutional chain. You have the POS chain becoming the validium. You have the CDKs, the ZK EVM. You have DA. It's like all these different things. I know what they are. I know what other projects are worth that do just one of those things. And I look at you guys and I'm like, you guys do it. You do it all, and you do it excellent. It's not like you just like, it's not like I'm going to all you can eat buffet and it's like, oh yeah, we do it, but it's like, low quality. It's like, no, you do it in most cases better than everyone else does it. What is wrong with the market right now? I don't understand.
I sometimes it's so funny, Jesse. Sometimes I ask myself, I'm like, why don't I just break it all up and just like magically make up that there's like 10 different companies doing each of these things, and then you would see what would happen in each of those ecosystems independently. It's kind of a really interesting thing because I've literally thought about this so many times. I'm like, why is Polygon just one? Maybe it shouldn't be.
Yeah, DA alone. What's Celestia? Celestia's like, I don't know what they're like. Are they like 10 billion now? Or they're higher, I think, than Polygon. And they do one of these things. One of them. I'm like mind boggled. At least you're acknowledging, at least like you're verifying to me that like my frustration and my like, what is going on is like justified. And there actually is something here. And it's going to be one of those cases where like for like the next, 9-10 months, I'm going to be like, why is nobody noticing Polygon? And then suddenly everyone's going to be like, wait a minute, what's happening over here at Polygon? And all at once it's going to happen. So
I think the aggregation layer will wake up a lot of people, but we will see.
Well, I guess kind of just to kind of wrap up, what are you most excited about 2024 with Polygon? I don't even know how you're going to answer that question, but good Go for it.
I mean, I'll combine what I started with and I'll bring it back home, right? Which is like the idea of infinite scalability and unlimited, infinite scalability and unified liquidity, right? And like every time I see one of these new CDK chains that are like going to launch, it kind of like amazes me like who is coming into the CDK ecosystem. And so that just like excites me to see like how many of these chains are going to launch and like be successful. I mean, that to me is like the key to this, right? Like I think like the number of CDK chains that launch is actually not that important. It's how many launch and end up being like super successful. And the thing that's like really cool is like those who want to build these chains are honestly like more dedicated than I think a lot of like app developers. That's not like uniform, like true, right? Like you've got a lot of really good app developers, but like sometimes it feels like, oh, I can just deploy this app and done. And it feels like a little bit more of a lift with CDK. It's not actually that much more of a lift, but it feels that way. And so the teams that you get building these are like very serious, and like the external parties when it comes to like enterprises, institutions that are building these is very exciting. So that's like one part of it, but that's only gets to like the scalability point. And then the other one that's just, we've talked about too many times now, right, is like the aggregation layer. Like that is completely like mind-blowing. It's even mind-blowing to me, and I talk about it like every day internally. But the day that I see like these CDK chains like transacting between them is going to be like one of my happiest days. I think like my firstborn might be a better day, but it'll be a close second. And so those are the things I'm excited about for 2024.
Wait, are you having a baby?
I've had 2.
Well, congratulations. I have 5 kids, and they are awesome. I love kids. They're amazing.
Dude, you're a brave man.
Yes, I am. Well, as always, none of this was investment advice. I do hold the MATIC token in the future. When it transitions, I'll hold the POL token. Crypto is risky. None of this should be misconstrued as some sort of investment advice. And if people want to stay up to date on everything Polygon's doing, where can they go, Marc? Where's the best place for them to like follow along and kind of, see these things kind of unfold?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is just go follow 0x Polygon on Twitter, and that's the easiest place.
Perfect. Hey, did I do a good job in my rap? You're a lawyer. Was that pretty good? What is there anything I should be saying?
That's pretty good.
Okay, perfect.